So this is a follow-up to another video I did about the worst Super Nintendo games, and if you didn't see that, or you just don't remember, the premise is I looked up as many ranked lists of the worst NES games that I could find, put them all onto a spreadsheet, and then plugged the results into a mathematical formula to dumb down how bad a game is with one numerical value, called the crap score. If you want to know more about the methodology, check out the beginning of that video, because I'm not explaining it again. A few seemed confused in the last one, but I think most people got it. But just to spell it out in plain English here, this list is not my opinion. If I were to rank these games based on what I thought were the worst, it would look much different. It is a ranking of a bunch of different lists I found online run through a mathematical formula. Got it? Don't admonish me for my bad picks. The only key difference between the last video and this one is I implemented a rule that a title must appear on at least 2 different lists for it to qualify for this. I did not do that last time, and as a result, the first 20 or 30 games were just things that appeared one time. That's a little lame. I came up with this rule after I found a kid on YouTube who called Mega Man 1 the worst game on the NES, which is just silly.
Or as I like to call it, like I just said, mega trash considering it's overrated garbage.
Anyway, with that rule in effect, the least bad, worst NES game is LJN's NFL Football with a crap score of 7.02. It looks a lot like Tecmo Super Bowl, but don't be fooled. It is slow. I mean, look at how slow the ball is in the air as it's being thrown. When you make 10-Yard Fight look like a faster-paced, more fun alternative, then you're doing something very wrong. Oh yeah, and despite having the NFL name and real teams, there's no real players. Crap score of 8.6. Winter Games. I actually had this one as a kid, so I have a little bit of reverence for it. It's terrible, though. After all these years, I still have no idea how to do the figure skating. I don't think I've even gotten a decimal point. You hit any button and she just falls down. I even looked up a scan of the manual this time and still couldn't figure it out. The other 3 events are okay once you know how they work, but that's it, man. You get 4 short, not very good minigames, and that's it. You see the entirety of Winter Games in 5 minutes, and for an NES title, that's kind of unacceptable. Next up is a game that takes way more than 5 minutes to beat, Rambo, which should be nowhere near these rankings. It's a cute little early adventure game. It's on here because there's a classic Angry Video Game Nerd episode about it. As with a lot of games on this list, it would be easier to point out which games he has not reviewed than it would be to point out all the ones that he has. He's talked about all 3 so far. Rambo on NES is my kind of game, though. I could see myself coming back to this at some point. Operation Secret Storm. It is the exact same premise as Russian Attack. You're sent in to a hostile nation, in this case Iraq, to do hand-to-hand combat with a whole bunch of people. Is this bad? Yeah, having nothing but short-range combat really makes this too much of a mosh pit. You just kinda get near guys, mash the button, hope for the best. Of course, Color Dreams would later become Wisdom Tree, and they would put out shit like King of Kings, which didn't work on my EverDrive, so I wasn't able to play it. It's very similar to another game called Bible Adventures, which we may or may not see later. Slightly crappier than that, we have Destination Earthstar. Crap score of 13.3 repeating. This didn't seem so bad. It's a 3D fly around and shoot shit game. And on the NES, that's impressive in its own right. Though this one, it's kinda hard to find stuff to shoot. You see this radar on the left side of the screen? These numbers are supposed to represent enemy ships, but you can fly around in the grid that they're supposed to be in for a while before they actually show up. And even when they do, it's kinda hard to hit them. Definitely not the worst thing I've ever played, though. You could do much worse. Then we have Harlem Globetrotters, which is like a bastardized version of Double Dribble, which is a game I already don't like. I am the #1 Double Dribble hater on the planet, but this game makes it look competent. The 45-second shot clock is adorable. Believe it or not, that's how college games actually used to be back in the 80s. Yeah, it's not fun. You walk up the court, you shoot, your players stand still. Sucks. Then we have an interesting one, Infiltrator. A huge problem with a lot of these NES games that made the list is that there is just no conveyance as to what is going on here. Like, I get into this plane, it's another flight simulator. I'm just trying to fly this plane and then, gee, that was an impressive landing. Like, okay, was I even in the air? It didn't look like it. I'm just hitting buttons. Then the game becomes like a shitty Metal Gear ripoff. I'm walking around the enemy base looking for stuff. Where are your papers? These are totally unacceptable. Like, okay, what was the point of letting me show the papers then? Do I really want to learn how to play this? Kinda a little bit. Also no, not really. Then we have Golf Grand Slam. It's golf. This is a game you don't have to learn how to play because it's golf. You hit the ball into the hole. I don't know why this is on the list. It seemed fine to me. You know what does suck about it though? The music. It's terrible. And golf games shouldn't legally be allowed to have bad music. That's just a gamer crime. 49th worst, crap score of 15.68, same as the last two games. Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. Just an average NES platformer. It's on here because there's an AVGN episode. One that it seems like the AVGN game took a non-insignificant amount of inspiration from. We have these colored instant death lasers, the exploding main character when you die. Overall, the platforming challenges seem to be very Beetlejuice-esque. This one's fine, I give it a pass. Then there's Top Players Tennis, featuring Chris Everett and Ivan Lendl. And again, much like the golf game, it's tennis. At least that's what I thought. I can't hit the ball past the net. I can on the serve, but not on any return swing. It just doesn't make it there. What the fuck? The only way I can get the ball across the net is if I stand up close. I'm sure I'm doing something wrong, but again, it's about conveyance. If your game is instantly confusing, it's just gonna get tossed into the suck pile and onto your worst NES games list. Flying Warriors is next, crap score 17.7 repeating. This one was interesting. It started as like a one-on-one fighting game for a tutorial, and then it became kind of like a platformer beat-em-up mashup. It didn't seem that bad. It was like a more spruced up Kung Fu, the black box game. A punches, B kicks, you jump like you're on the moon. I made it a couple stages in, it was fun. Don't see the hate. Next up is Fist of the North Star, a similar game to Flying Warriors. This one I do kind of see the hate with. The jump is comically large, combat's a little stupid, the second stage is like a maze and I got lost. It just feels like a bad game. You know when you hold the controller and just how the character moves? Sometimes you just know this is not the good stuff. Like with Renegade, a beat-em-up that's hard as frick. I couldn't get past the first screen. But this game actually predated Double Dragon on both the NES and the arcade. So it has to have points for originality, right? It's a pioneer. But yeah, once Double Dragon and River City Ransom came out, it pretty much made this game an antiquated piece of shit instantly. At 44th worst, we have Top Gun, which I've already played 2 worse flight sims. Again, it's only here because that's a classic AVGN episode. I landed the plane my first time ever playing this game. If you know to match the numbers, you're golden. It's a much more arcadey take on the fly around and shoot shit genre. In Destination Earthstar, which I played earlier, you can fly in all directions, and I think in Infiltrator too, even though the graphics didn't reflect that. In this one, you're on rails. It's more like Afterburner, Star Fox, or Panzer Dragoon than it is anything else. Yeah, another game that's not that bad. More infamous than it is actually shit. Here's one which was actually much worse than I expected. Kid Cool, another AVGN game, but he didn't do it until later, is much worse than the footage makes it look. The momentum is fucked. You're either going way too fast or not fast enough. As a result, jumping on stuff is such a pain. The game looks like it should just control like a Mario facsimile, but it doesn't. It's leaps of faith, the game, because you can never see where you're going. You have to do this thing where you run and get ahead of steam and then jump a county mile to the next continent, but you don't know where you're landing. Yeah, this was terrible. Next with a crap score of 25.1, we're getting up there now. Athena. This game is fucking terrible. I don't even know how to describe it. We're starting to get to some indefensible stuff. At first I couldn't figure out the jump arcs because it seemed random how high she'd go. With most games, the longer you hold A, the higher your character jumps, but here she was just kind of doing whatever she wanted and it was befuddling to me. Then I realized that it works like Mario 64 in a 2D action game, and only strictly like Mario 64. Mario 64 still had, you could still control how high you jumped by how hard you press the button, but in this one, it's predetermined, but it's like double and triple jumps. Like you jump, and then you jump again, and then you jump a third time, and that's the high jump. Your weapon sucks, it's barely out in front of you. You can just tell, playing this game for 5 minutes, it sucks. Then there's Total Recall, another infamous game. You know, the midgets in the alleyway, Arnold Schwarzenegger going around beating midgets, beating your wife. I mean, that actually happens, kind of, in the movie. And then a guy keeps shooting infinitely into the room. Yeah, that's as far as I made it. Here's a big one, Hide Lied. What? That's crazy. The people who make these lists are just blind to adventure games. Infamous bump combat, lots of grinding, takes forever to level up, seemingly random whoever wins fights. It's a small adventure game, port of a PC title from the early 80s that didn't come to the NES until 89. A famous tale of wrong place, wrong time, but being misunderstood still doesn't make it any good, and it's not. I can't get over that it's all the way down here at 40, though. I thought for sure this would be top 10. Next up, WWF WrestleMania. And to be honest, I've never understood any of the pro wrestling games on NES. Black Box Pro Wrestling is a game I have constantly heard great things about, and I've tried playing it many time and don't understand what people see in it. As for this one, it's just a weird fighting game. The characters do a lot of spinning around. And Hogan pinned me when I was face down on the mat, that cheating bastard. I don't know, it seemed okay to me. I don't know what makes this particularly bad. Mighty Bomb Jack, my go-to example of a bad NES game. Well deserved, I'm glad it made an appearance because this game sucks. It's just way too simple. It's a platformer that you're just too small and I don't know, I just hate it. I hate this game. Screw it. Screw Mighty Bomb Jack. Screw you if you like it. Bah. Next up we have not Home Alone 2, but Home Alone 1. This is a what the fuck is going on game. I'm running around the house laying traps. That's all well and good, but what's my objective here? Just to survive? And if so, how long? I lasted 7 minutes, and that's all I can take. Crap score 29.76, Fester's Quest. This game always looked cool to me. It's the first time I've ever played it, and yeah, it's a little crusty. Gets the AVGN bump, of course. My main complaint is just that it takes way too many hits to kill things. I switched to my turbo controller, and even then, it seemed like having to mash the button to kill these things would just be cruel and unnecessary punishment. Next up, it's Spider-Man: Return of the Sinister Six. Look, the title screen is the meme. I had no idea that was a Spider-Man thing. My first impressions are, this controls much worse than it looks. It's weird. It looks like it should just control normal, but of course, yeah, that's not how it works. Your attack by default is like this weird jump kick that's hurt box is like out in front of you. You expect to just be able to hit shit next to you. I'm not sure exactly how to shoot the web, it just seemed to happen whenever it wanted. The jumping is weird, it's kind of like Castlevania rules, but your jumps are much larger, so it's just awkward and you're stuck in the air for much longer. It's weird to have such a fluid character like Spider-Man, who, you know, his superpower is his mobility, be constrained to such a rigid control scheme. And that's really the main thing, is that Spider-Man just controls weird. The game seemed fine otherwise. At least until I got stuck in this pit and couldn't for the life of me figure out how to get out. And no, I can't just grab the ledge like in Flashback. Aw, hell yeah, it's Bible Adventures. I say that, but of course it's not good, per se. It's still entertaining. This is like a meme NES game. You remember this one, right? It's the one with adult Moses picking up all those animals, and the one with baby Moses that you have to carry on top of your head. Honestly, for an unlicensed Bible game, not the worst thing in the world. It controls fine, sure the objectives are a little weird, but it's really just the premise that's stupid. Next up we have Tag Team Wrestling, another pro wrestling game. game, though this one doesn't feature any real human beings. And yeah, this one's much worse than WrestleMania. I have no idea what the hell's going on. There are some cool scene changes, like when you get outside the ring, which is actually how I lost. I got counted out. Yeah, this is a piece of shit. This sucks. Glad I made the list. Next up, Bad Street Brawler. One that seems really shitty, and is really shitty, but I was actually kind of getting into it. It seemed like the kind of jank you could still have fun with. The beginning of each stage has this intro thing where you can feel out the controls, which is actually very modern. I would expect to see this in indie games coming out now, not NES games coming out in the 80s. And this is obviously a lousy game. Listen to that wind instrument cutting through the music. Ooh, that's the smoking gun. That is some ear-wrenching shit. You're going around fighting pit bulls and little old-timey circus midget strongmen? Or maybe you're just really tall. Where is this? What are these streets I'm brawling on? It's like I went to the circus and just started picking fights. Now I'm fighting a gorilla? It's bog simple. There's no 3 dimensions to it. You just walk to the right, kick, trip, and punch people. I don't know though, it's a little endearing. The controls are strange and it's not very well made, but it has heart. Much like Sunday Fun Day, another game with heart? This is the Bible title that had the karaoke. Yeah. It's also the one that replaced that naked girl from the game that they published before with Going to Sunday School. This is a game that doesn't so much exist as it is just a thing that happened in AVGN once. When I played it, it seemed okay. It's a platformer beat-em-up hybrid, one where it's really hard to hit things. That's a calling card for Color Dreams / Wisdom Tree. In all their games, it's hard to hit things. Why is this Christian game so violent? You're just going around beating people up. It has some cool mechanics though, lighting in the sewers, those things that bounce you all over the place. The platforming controls are fine too. You even get a little weird corrective double jump. Not calling Sunday Fun Day great, but you can do much worse. You also have unlimited lives, so the game's only over when you want it to be over. And I want it to be over right now, because we have 29 more games to get to, such as Karate Kid, crap score 39.71. And that's ridiculous because this game's not bad at all. It's a more complicated kung fu, which is the second time I've said that in this video. I had this one as a kid, so I can plow through it anytime, no problem. Here's a neat trick. The game will only spawn in 2 enemies at a time, so you can just run past them. And as long as you keep them in frame, you can just keep running away without fighting anyone. Karate Kid's alright. Definitely nowhere near the worst NES game. But here's a real contender. Next up is Mario is Missing 44.14. Shocked to see it this low. And Time Machine didn't even register. Didn't even make the list. Spoilers. Is there anything redeemable about Mario is Missing? It looks fake. It looks like it should be a bootleg. And it's embarrassing that Nintendo would let this happen. There is no conveyance as to what you were supposed to be doing. You jump into an unmarked pipe, appear in a random city, and have to try to figure out where you are. And then once you're in that city, almost nothing is interactable. The way you're supposed to figure out where you are is to jump on these Koopas, smash them with really bad hit detection. Then you get an item, and from these items, you're supposed to then intuit where in the world you are. Let's see, we have a spear, a honeycomb, or maybe these are coins, and paint? Vaguely Native American imagery, I guess? But there's not really a place that represents that on the world map. So where am I supposed to go? Did you guess Rome? If so, you're correct. Those were coins. And Romans used coins. They also painted stuff. The spear? I don't fucking know. I guess they use spears too? Anyway, yeah, Mario's Missing sucked. Sucked the big one. Bart vs. the Space Mutants had almost the exact same crap score, but edged it out by a couple decimal points. It controls like shit, the objective makes no sense, it has almost nothing to do with The Simpsons, aside from the characters you play as. There's not much nice to say about this one. It's weird that only this one made the list when Bart vs. the World is just as bad. I would classify this as playable but not fun. And Bart vs. the Space Mutants was the beginning of a long storied history of video games not knowing what the hell to do with The Simpsons. Even the arcade game, fun in a vacuum, it's very un-Simpsons-like. Them just walking around town beating people up. And speaking of not getting the characters right, next up is Coen, the infamous you press down to jump game. Conan's supposed to be pretty strong, right? I've never seen the movie, but I'm sure he's a badass in those, so why do they make you feel weak and helpless in his game? I mean, look at this kick. You're not killing anything with this. It's an awkward platformer that would have been right at home on the ZX Spectrum or something. Definitely doesn't do the character justice. 25th worst, crap score of 45.71. A game which was not on my radar, but as soon as I started playing, I got it. I mean, look at this. Look at this. This might be low-key the worst game on the list. It's called Muppet Adventures, by the way. I know there's 24 more games with a crap score higher, but man, most of them don't deserve it. This would have been pathetic for an Atari 2600 game, let alone an NES title. It is the definition of the developers going, it's for kids, so who cares? And then putting in the minimal amount of effort to get a license. I don't even know how this got a license. Like, seriously, what the fuck, Nintendo in the 80s? Why are you letting this come out for your system? Man, this is just fucking shit. Oh my god. Wow. Next game, a more infamous one because of AVGN. It's Silver Surfer. Now, I don't play shmups. This one is supposedly incredibly difficult, but I've actually heard by people in the know, people who play shoot-em-ups a lot, that the difficulty is actually not as bad as far as shmups go. Being impossible is kind of the genre's thing. All I know is I tried a few stages and it was kicking my ass. Game itself seemed okay, I wouldn't call it bad or anything. The stages have a bit of variety anyway, some are left to right, some are bottom to top. You can choose which order to play them in, and that's cool, right? Next up is Muscle! Another wrestling game, albeit a very cartoony one. I know this one's based on some property in Japan, but I don't care and that doesn't make it good. It has this unappealing art style. I cannot stand how this game looks. I don't want to play something with these visuals. Just full stop. Even if the gameplay is good, ugh. Get this off my screen. I think every NES wrestling game controls like shit, and this one doesn't feel any worse than the last ones I played. Hell, I don't know if it feels any worse to play than Black Box Pro Wrestling. Next up, Hudson Hawk, a game I didn't know anything about. It's kind of like a puzzle platformer. It actually reminds me of the AVGN game. Not the famous one, the fan-made one from 2007. Jumping on rooftops. Number 21, Little Red Hood. Sucks, you know all about this one. Game you know instantly is terrible. Unlicensed, it was that weird cartridge you had to put another game inside of to get it to work. This is the reason Nintendo insisted on their own licensing system. Just so trash like this would get filtered out. It is indefensible. You walk around collecting shit, your attack doesn't seem to do anything. It's not clear at all what you're supposed to be doing or where you're supposed to be going. It's trash. The only reason it's not higher is because it's so rare, so not a lot of people had it as a kid. Ranking above it at number 20, crap score of 55.65 is Barbie. Of course this game sucks, duh. I guess in the broadest strokes it's a puzzle platformer, sort of. It's walking simulator, you move so slow. You're just throwing balls at stuff. Your sprite is ginormous like a Barbie doll, so I guess they got that right. But man, could you make a more unappealing game? Ugh. It almost feels like playing a regular NES game, only you take up a quarter of the screen and you move like you're trying to be fashionably late to everything. Next up, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the biggest travesty on the entire list. Not deserved at all, not even close to the 19th worst NES game. I've said it a million times, I'm gonna say it again, it's only on here because the Angry Video Game Nerd. One of the most iconic episodes was of course about this game. I feel like if you're making a bottom 10 NES games list that was your own opinion, the only way TMNT could be there is if your only frame of reference are the 15 or so games you had as a kid. Yeah, out of your childhood collection of those, maybe it was one of the 10 worst that you had, but fundamentally it's a pretty good platforming action game with a few quirks that make it not quite an all-time classic. But I like this game a heck of a lot more than I like the beat-em-up sequels on NES. Just because James Rolfe made some pretty entertaining jokes about it 18 years ago doesn't make the game trash. And do you want a warped sense of time? That video is now older than this game was when he talked about it. The amount of time between Ninja Turtles releasing and that Angry Video Game Nerd episode was shorter than the amount of time of that Angry Video Game Nerd episode to now. These games are getting ancient. Next up, Color a Dinosaur. To their credit, you get exactly what you get, at least the game is honest. Surprisingly, most of the lists I sampled were pretty good about not including non-games such as this. For example, Taboo, that tarot card reader, didn't make a single one. Color a Dinosaur is not a video game. It's a way to color dinosaurs, designed for kids who might not even know how to use the toilet yet. I would not have personally included it in any personal ranking, but I get it. This is low-effort garbage, a cheap money grab, a scam, maybe even? I don't know, call it whatever you want. It's trash. Obvious trash. I'm just glad it's not in the top 10. Number 17, craft score of 56.37, Rocky and Bullwinkle. Legendarily horrible music. It's like they programmed it out of key. And that's impressive because the NES isn't a musical instrument. You would have to intentionally do this. It's not like a flute where you just play it and it sounds weird because you don't know what you're doing. I always found old nostalgia interesting, like the 80s looking back at the 50s. This was a cartoon in the 50s, right? Because it didn't work like today where nothing ever dies. Like, Ninja Turtles still exists. They still fucking make Ninja Turtles for some reason. They just never let anything die anymore. But back then, they let things die. And then they would just get brought back briefly 30 years later for people to remember, and then they moved on with their lives. That's just not how it works anymore. The next game's another example of this. Gilligan's Island, which is a property I know nothing about. I've never watched it. I've never seen the movie. There is a movie, right? That's why this is a game, because there was a movie in the 90s or some shit. You walk around, you try to punch snakes and other animals and mostly fail. Yeah, I believe you. This seems like it sucks. It's a beat 'em up where you can't hit anything. I just kept punching through them. It's also a where the fuck do you go kind of game, even though there's a map. I don't know. I still don't know what I'm doing. I'm more confused than anything at Gilligan's Island. There's constant text at the bottom of the screen. I don't know. I'm just off put by this one. Of all of the instantly befuddling NES games, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Heroes of the Lance may just take the cake. Its first screen places you in a hallway, you move incredibly slow, none of the buttons seem to do anything except select, which brings up a menu, on which there are an overwhelming number of options, some of which have no obvious use. What's the difference between use, give, or drop? Why are there two different types of spells? Score? What is that all about? Hero select seems to do nothing. I pick it, hit A to select my hero, and then nothing happens. I'm still the same character. In the game proper, there's a doorway that I'm obviously supposed to go through, but I'm hitting up and down and nothing seems to be happening. Then you might figure out that you actually can run if you hold down the D-pad long enough. You get a little landing strip for it. And while you're running, if you hit A, you're actually able to do a tiny little jump. Nowhere near far enough to get you to the other side of this pit, though. So what gives? The first time I played this, I jumped my entire party into the pit and game overed. And it's times like this where we consult the manual, a pamphlet where I read one of the most fucked up paragraphs in video game instruction booklet history. Your first 5 minutes with Heroes of the Lance. Once you know how to use the controller, here is a brief run-through of moving and fighting in Heroes of the Lance. First, from the combat screen, press select to get to the main menu. Choose the use command and choose Karaman's spear, Terrace's arrows, Tasselhoof's bouch of pullets, Riverwind's arrows, and Flint's throwing axes, one at a time. From the main menu, choose magic user spells, then choose web, then choose clerical staff spells, then choose spiritual hammer. This readies all of the character's ranged attacks. From the main menu, choose Hero Select, choose Gold Moon, then choose Caramon. This puts the two most powerful fighters as the first and second characters, and keeps Gold Moon and Rasslin in the front rank where they can use their spells. Save the game after all of the characters are prepared, so from now on you can quickly get started. Did you get all that? What the fuck, game? Your own instruction manual tells you how to do 5 minutes of menuing, then to save before even starting. Why not, begin the game with all of this already done? But no, you don't actually have to do all that shit. They tell you to do all of it because everyone starts with their weapons unequipped. You have to manually go in to make sure that everyone can attack first. You change the lead party member like in Pokemon in the Hero Select menu. If you tap A and then hold a direction down, it rearranges the character portraits on the bottom of the screen. Whoever's at the top left is your active character, and anyone in the top row are able to cast spells. This equip system is one of the most annoying things I've ever experienced in any RPG or RPG-like in history, especially for anyone who uses a ranged weapon such as the spear. Realistically, let's take a look at the amount of effort it takes to use this. Alright, our first enemy. Remember, weapons start unequipped, so you have to open up the menu, hit use, select the spear, exit the menu, throw the spear by holding B in the direction you want to throw. Ah, shoot, it didn't kill him. So you have to run over, open up the menu again, hit take, select the spear, exit the menu, open the menu again, pick use, select the spear again, back out of the menu, and then you can throw the spear again. This time it kills him, thankfully. Oh lord, this game blows. So naturally I finished it, of course, because why wouldn't I? The entire game is basically a giant door maze. If you look up the solution or figure it out once, the critical path is actually fairly short. The final boss is a non-fight. All you do is throw the magic staff you start the game with at it, and they die in one hit. That's it. Heroes of the Lance defeated. Next up is Cheetah Men 2, which is stupid because Cheetah Men 2 is not a real video game. It was never sold in stores, it was never released, it's a prototype that got leaked, and it's not even possible to finish. Including this on your list of the worst NES games is pointless. It's like calling some PS1 RPG Maker project your cousin made the worst video game of all time. I mean, maybe it is, who's to say, but that's not really fair. It's almost like picking on random ROM hacks. If we're just strictly going by what's on the ROM, Cheetah Men 2 is the worst game on this list, don't get me wrong. The thing doesn't even work, it's barely a video game. But where are we drawing the line? I say, if the product never came out, then it shouldn't be considered for any of these. Despite that, plenty of people included it on their lists, so here it is. Under protest, I am forced to include it. Here's one that deserves it though, Back to the Future 2 and 3. I'm secondhand familiar with this. For people in the know, if you're really into the NES and speedrunners and people who play a ton of NES games, then you know that Back to the Future 2 and 3 is one of the most difficult titles on the system. But I really didn't know why off the top of my head, I just kind of vaguely knew this was a monster of a game. It starts with a short cutscene explaining the plot of the movie until all of a sudden it doesn't. To protect the almanac, Biff scattered objects throughout time and space and locked them behind closed doors. As a result, the time continuum is falling apart.
I don't remember that from the movie.
Joking aside, that's a harbinger for what's to come. The game's major flaw is that it's needlessly complicated and obtuse. It's a side-scrolling, where the fuck do you go kind of game. It's also a stealth adventure game, but you only get 9 lives and then you have to start all over. The main idea is that you're supposed to find hidden objects and then return them to the rightful place. It's not clear which item goes where, and here's the real kick in the balls that makes this one of the most infamous games on the system. If you guess wrong and put the item on an incorrect location, it is destroyed and you have to go find it again. It's hard enough just finding one item. They're not obvious, you have to do a bunch of cryptic nonsense to get them. Then you have to win a mini game, which are oftentimes very difficult. Just obtaining one item was difficult enough, but to actually win this game, you have to get 30. Yay. It's a little interesting how you actually travel through time. The game has a set layout, but depending on if you're in 1955, 85, or 2015, the scenery and details change, which alter the stage. Unfortunately, this also just makes the game more confusing because it just opens up more opportunities to place items in the wrong location. Then apparently once you finish it, there's a whole other game on top of this. 3 is apparently exactly the same gameplay as 2, just with different stages and objects. I didn't get that far though, obviously. Guides are mandatory, and even with them, I don't have the patience. Back to the Future 2 and 3 is terrible, much worse than the other Back to the Future game, which is coming up later. Then at 12th worst, we have, sadly, Friday the 13th. Another one maligned for being too complicated, but it's actually much simpler than it seems. This is a one-objective game. Kill Jason. Not me. Okay, maybe me. Do it by any means necessary. There's no one correct path. You just have to kill Jason before he either kills all your characters or kills the kids. This game is way too cool to be this high on this list. But that's the AVGN effect. It's one of his most iconic episodes, so the game must suck too then, right? Wrong! Well, I mean, it's not great, but I wouldn't say it sucks either. I'm not a longtime fanboy of this game either. I've really only gave it a chance for the first time for this video, and I managed to beat Jason once. But you have to do it 3 times to finish the game. The gameplay is kind of cool though. You start out running away from Jason. You basically do anything to avoid him. But then once you start getting some good weapons, then the tables turn and it's you hunting down Jason, which the old switcheroo, the old Pac-Man power pellet effect is really cool to see in action on a grander, more meta level. He always moves either clockwise or counterclockwise. It never changes. So once you know what direction he's moving in, once you get equipped, hunting him down is a lot of fun actually. The controls are fine, the music is creepy, it actually kind of puts you on edge. It's not a terrible premise for a game. Just with this and a lot of other titles that appear on this list, it's not obvious what to do immediately, so it's up to the player to decide if they want to learn how it works. I'm a firm believer that you can choose to like anything you want, and a lot of bad games become enjoyable once you learn all the ins and outs of them. Even something like Heroes of the Lance, I have a certain fondness for because, hey, I learned it and I finished it. But I really don't think the rakes to the face on this one are that bad. But I do understand why people who had this when they were a kid were frustrated, because it's a guide game for sure. There's a great GameFAQs thread with images and everything. I didn't even know GameFAQs had guides like these. It goes under the hood, really gets to the heart of how this game ticks, and it's fascinating to read through. I almost had as much fun reading about how this game works than I did playing it, which I suppose is damning. With it though, I'm attempting to finish it at least, because I really enjoy the aesthetics, and the gameplay loops once you actually know what's going on is fun too. Probably not great per se, but 12th worst isn't even close to deserved. I mean, come on, the math gods couldn't place it 13th. We were this close! Anyway, next we have 11th worst. Crap score 98.46. Karate Champ is one of the worst things ever. I cannot say one nice thing about it. This is a pre-Street Fighter one-on-one combat game, and it's uncontrollable. You cannot control this. I actually played it with another real-life person, shout out to ChaoticMeatball. It's much worse than Urban Champion. Spoilers, Urban Champ didn't make the list. In fact, no classic Black Box NES game did, which is a little surprising because I would have expected to see a couple, namely Urban Champ and 10-Yard Fight. Karate Champ's graphics are bad, as you can see, but the real issue, as I said, is the control or lack of. I don't know what button combination does what move. Right when you think you've figured something out, whatever you're doing stops working for no reason. You cannot press the same button input twice in a row and get it to do the same thing. It does not happen. You can guess, and you can maybe get it like 60% of the time it'll do what you're expecting, but this is a game that almost plays itself. You just hit buttons. It's also a game without hit detection. You can be right up your opponent's ass, punching them for eternity before the game decides that someone wins or loses. How do you actually hit your opponents? I don't know. It feels completely arbitrary and random. Sometimes moves work, but most of the time, they just don't. Double Dragons Mode B is better, Karate Kid 2-player is better, Urban Champ is better, Chinese bootleg Street Fighter 2 ports are better. Karate Champ is one of the worst games on the system, and if anything, 11 is being much too nice. Then we have Super Pitfall crossing the 100 barrier for crap scores, number 10. This game is much worse than I expected. Of course, I was aware of it because of the Angry Video Game Nerd and through osmosis or whatever, but it's much more stiff and stilted than I would have expected. It feels like it should be an Atari 7800 game, but it wasn't. This was NES and Japanese home computers only, and I think it would have been okay on the 7800. It would have been alright on that platform. If you compare this to the original Pitfall, and then to Pitfall 2, I think Super Pitfall comes across as okay. It's sort of like a larger Pitfall 2. But in the lands of Mario and Metroid, this is antiquated as fuck. It's a wide open-ended platformer centered around finding hidden objects, not unlike Back to the Future 2. It's nowhere near as obtuse or unforgiving as that one though. But it makes up for it by controlling like shit and looking a lot worse. You only get 3 lives and it's game over. The game's not fun, but I could squint and under a certain light could see how someone might like it, or under a different set of circumstances it might be considered a classic. Because on Atari, on the 2600 with Pitfall and Pitfall 2, you're thinking, oh, how cute. This is almost like a real video game. But it's on Atari, so it really can't. And then moving to the NES is like their chance to actually become a real video game, and it's really not. I think if this was on the 7800, it would be considered the best game on the system, mind you. Just attempting to be kind of a complex platformer was probably enough for that thing. But yeah, wrong time, wrong place. David Crane had nothing to do with this one, it was Japanese made. But don't worry, we're gonna see Mr. Crane show up later, soon enough. Number 9, crap score 108.81. Dragon's Lair on NES takes the arcades concept much too literally. That was an interactive cartoon with QuickTime events that happened so fast, the only way you'd be able to beat them is if you already knew what was going to happen. This version is a side-scrolling platformer filled with one-hit death traps that you can only avoid if you know exactly what is going to happen. In a way, that's cute. They managed to craft an adaptation which is true to the original in that regard, which in the broadest strokes is admirable, but it's simply not fun to play. They got the speed wrong for one. It's one of the slowest moving games on the entire NES, and there's nothing worse than dying to a death trap in slow motion. Everything is incredibly delayed, which is not satisfying. You have to commit to movements seconds ahead of time. Instant death traps are not fun to figure out, especially since you have limited lives and no continues. Every time you run out, you have to start the game from the beginning. In a lot of ways, it's similar to the SNES port of its cousin Space Ace. Intentionally insufferable controls, but just because something is intentional doesn't make it good. Maybe if you already have this entire game memorized, it'd be fun to blast through, but learning it sucks. And I think a huge problem when adapting these FMV arcade games to any kind of action-based style, without just throwing the whole concept out and making a whole new game, I mean with the approach that they ended up taking, making the side-scroller a memory-based game where you already have to know what's going to happen. The limited interactability actually worked in the cartoon arcade's favor, because you're only capable of a few different actions. You can move or you can swing your sword, then a canned animation plays that responds to your input. With an action game, there are way more variables, so it takes much longer to learn each screen. In the arcade, let's say the floor is falling, so you hit left to escape, but then the animation plays out and reveals that the proper way to avoid this was to step to the right. Now you know without any ambiguity what you were supposed to do. In the NES version, just take the first screen of the game for an example, you are probably going to die dozens of times just getting past this one dragon. It isn't made obvious what you were supposed to do after one death. It's not as simple as just hitting the sword button anymore, like it was in the arcades. The concept just doesn't translate. Interesting idea on paper, failed experiment in practice. A slight step up in the crap score, Bill and Ted begins with exactly what you want in a video game. It starts with a phone dialing simulator, and then an incomprehensible minigame with numbers and pipes and spinning chalkboard erasers. No wait, I think that's supposed to be the phone booth. What the fuck is going on here? That's the hallmark of a great game, just instant confusion. You have to pick a number to dial. I chose Sitting Bull. Then I go through this stupid minigame and I end up here? In like medieval times? What is this? Who are these Monty Python and the Holy Grail guards looking guys? They grab me, throw me in jail, but then I can just walk back out? What is going on here? This is one of those games where you wander around and have no idea what you're supposed to be doing. It is way too overcomplicated and doesn't explain itself well enough. I wandered around for about half an hour, didn't figure anything out on my own, then looked up the LJN Defenders review, where I discovered that even he didn't like it, so that's a problem. But then once you figure out how you're actually supposed to play this game, it gets even dumber. You know how I said that a lot of times you grow in appreciation and you learn to like even bad games once you figure out how they work? Well, this game had the opposite effect. It was bad, but I didn't think it was too terrible just wandering around. But then when I learned what I'm actually supposed to do, I instantly stopped playing because it was way too stupid. This is another find the hidden objects game, much like Back to the Future 2 and 3 or Super Pitfall. But the objects are randomly placed, and the only way to find them is to jump into every single unmarked bush and fence until they happen to show up. No, I'm not kidding. That's just what the game is. You just walk around jumping into bushes and fences. It's so stupid, and you always fall over. The feedback you're getting from the animations from jumping into stuff is that you're not supposed to do that, so why would I just go around doing it randomly? This is another LJN game. They reused the same concept of Back to the Future 2 and 3. You just find hidden objects, then you bring them back to the person, and if you get it wrong, you're fucked. You're fucked. It's one of the dumbest core gameplay loops I've ever heard of. It sucks, deserves to be here. Here's another one that's baffling for entirely different reasons. Your task is to make a game about Back to the Future, so what do you come up with? Some guy endlessly running down the road shooting bowling balls at bees, hula hoop girls, guys moving panes of glass back and forth, collecting clocks like they're coins in Super Mario Brothers? Sure, I guess that's as valid as any other interpretation. The game takes 4 events from the movie. It's diner scene, your mom trying to date you, the enchantment under the sea dance, and actually getting home, spaces them out and stitches them together with this bizarre auto runner. Not unlike a game you'd see on phones over 2 decades later. And it's the same cathartic gameplay loop as those phone games. Back to the Future on NES is bizarre, no doubt, but at least it's simple. You just have to keep running. Don't get hit, pick up clocks so that picture of you doesn't disappear. I don't hate this at all. In fact, I think it's a little progressive. It's nice to see something that's not just a side-scroller or a game about finding random objects. It is weird that what I'm looking at is supposed to be Back to the Future because they got the vibes all wrong, but the game itself, average to slightly below average. You could do a lot worse, such as number 6, Where's Waldo? There's not much to say about this one. It's an adaptation of the books about finding the titular Waldo. Those were great because of the claustrophobic, highly detailed page art. Compare that to the NES game and, well, you can already see the problem. Graphics are nowhere near intricate enough to do this concept for a game justice. Everyone looks the same and nothing is detailed enough for this to work. The problem with this game is in the title. Yeah, where's Waldo? As in, where the hell is he? Even after I found him in this tiny square, which one of these pixels is Waldo? They made another NES follow-up and it's much better than this, and you can plainly see why. It's much more detailed. The original, however, should have never came out. It's the kind of thing that should have been canceled and reworked very early on, but they didn't, and it came out as a quick buck, shitty product. Let's move on to number 5. Ghostbusters, or should I say... This is another one I had as a kid, except back then I didn't figure anything out. You're on this crude map of Manhattan, none of the buttons do anything except B, which makes a blank white square appear. You can touch ghosts, but it doesn't seem to do anything, and that's as far as I made it as a kid. I never saw any of the rest of the game. Though much like Friday the 13th, it's actually much simpler than it appears. None of the buttons did anything because you're forced to go to the shop first. You know, the infamous ghost-busting store. Which begs the question, why doesn't the game just start at the shop if you're required to go there first anyway? In the main gameplay loop of this game, all it is, you're grinding so you can afford the gear you need to go up the staircase at the end of the game. There's equipment for catching ghosts, which you have to buy to make money, and there's equipment for climbing the stairs. You don't start with enough money for the stairs, so the game is buying the ghost capturing stuff and saving up until you can afford to try the end game. There's also a timer. If you wait too long, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man comes to life and your game is over. Insanely simple and repetitive, it is grinding the game. David Crane made this, well, not this version, but the Commodore 64 original. That original is actually considered to be pretty good, but it's the same basic game. In fact, the Commodore one has even less to it because there's no staircase sequence at the end. You just go around catching ghosts. Goes to show how much platform matters when discussing these old games. There's just a higher standard of quality on the NES than there was on other ways to play games at the time. Granted, the Commodore Ghostbusters looks and sounds much better than the NES version, but when that's considered a standout and this is rightfully considered one of the worst original Nintendo games, even bad Nintendo isn't really that bad in the grand scheme of things. But that's about to change with our final four. Marvel's Uncanny X-Men was not a game I expected to see so high up. Of course I was aware of it because of the Angry Video Game Nerd, but it never sat in my brain as being particularly terrible. While finding lists to compile into my bullshit stats, I was continuously seeing it at or near the top, which shocked me. I'm not one for superheroes in general, so I guess its stench just flew above my nose. But this is obviously atrocious as soon as you start playing. The game doesn't really have backgrounds or even graphics as much as it has random garbage data. I mean, look at it. The thing is madness. There is no concept of what I'm supposed to be looking at. I know it's the NES, but games usually at least attempted to have backgrounds and objects which remind the player of something that might exist in real life. With this, I got nothing. What are we supposed to be looking at? It's the difference between drawing a crude landscape or just closing your eyes and scribbling onto a piece of paper than trying to tell me that it's supposed to represent something. There's characters which shoot, others that nudge, almost hide-lied style, which begs the question why you would ever not want to choose someone who shoots. I didn't make it very far, but I read that the only way to access the final stage is with a secret code found within that tiny text at the bottom of the cartridge. Were they going for some kind of Metal Gear Solid moment where you check the box for a video phone number? I have no idea. Just like the game, it's stupid. Couldn't bring myself to play it for very long. Let's move on. To number 3. Crap score 261.3 repeating. It's Deadly Towers. This is what Sean Baby picked for the worst, and it's probably a gamer crime that this has gone on however long it's gone now, and I haven't even mentioned Sean Baby. He was before my time, so his cultural sphere of influence doesn't quite reach me. But I am aware of him, and I have to pay respects to the guy who invented being funny online. Obviously, the Angry Video Game Nerd's fingerprints shaped these rankings the most, but Sean Baby is a clear second place. A million years ago, not exactly sure when, because he doesn't put a date on his articles, Sean Baby ranked his worst 20 NES games, and remarkably, 19 out of 20 of them ended up qualifying for these rankings. Remember, the only requirement was that I found a given game on at least one other list. The lone title I could not was Chubby Cherub. Anyway, the game itself was more than I bargained for. It's just a dumpy little Zelda clone, but one that gets all of the nuances wrong. It's much more unforgiving as death results in losing everything except story progress and equipment upgrades. It's much too easy to accidentally walk off a cliff and die suddenly. There are 10 dungeons and every single one of them looks like this. They're all exactly as large, too. Incomprehensible. Even using maps, everything looks exactly the same. There are no distinguishing features which makes one room stand out any more than any other. It's a mess. The combat is repetitive and bland, everything takes way too many hits to die, and you attack by shooting your sword, only one allowed on screen at a time. The game doesn't go down easy, it's not fun to play moment to moment. Deadly Towers is pretty indefensible. And that only leaves 2 games unsaid, and you probably know what they are. You know it, you love it. It's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, of course, the Angry Video Game Nerd's nemesis game. He invented the trope. Every YouTube game reviewer needs a nemesis game, right? It's the reason they're all so kooky and crazy. Peanut Butter Gamer had My Sims, Scott the Woz had Ziplash, Irate Gamer had Aladdin, I guess. I have Barbie Explorer, and the Angry Video Game Nerd had E.T. Wait, he had 2? Guess so. Anyway, Jekyll and Hyde is ostensibly an action game, but you move glacially slow, and that's already a problem. When making a game, especially back then, in general, slower just meant worse. And if you actually want to get anywhere in this, you have to play the game even slower than the pace your character moves, which slowing down an already slow game to succeed, just not a recipe for fun. You know how most games have slowdown, as in when there's too much going on, the NES can't process everything fast enough so the game slows down? This has to be the one and only game I've ever played with speed up, the opposite. As in, when there's too much going on in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the game actually gets faster, defying all logic. The whole thing is confusing because your cane doesn't seem to do anything, and the Mr. Hyde part isn't explained to the player at all. I played it for about 4 hours, made it to the final stage, but alas, was unable to finish. My overall takeaway, it's not fun, but also, as I've said a lot in this video, it is in no way the second worst thing I've played. I think you could scrape lower. Now it's stupid and the levels are repetitive and it makes no sense as to why everything wants to kill you at all times, but it's at least recognizably a game. Not something I can say for everything else that's been on the list. Which of course this extends to our final title. Drumroll please. You already know what it is. It's Action 52 because of course it is. Duh!